Hey there. Welcome back to the quiet side of time. Tonight, we drift into ancient Egypt, where the Nile carried not only water, but memory. Dim the lights, soften your shoulders, and let your breath match the river's gentle rhythm. If calm stories like this help you rest, you may subscribe now, or after the meow. I've saved a hidden secret for the very end. The desert breathed in silence, and the Nile exhaled in rhythm. Golden sands stretched endlessly, but always, the river curved back to life. Every dawn began the same, a pale blush of light over the eastern horizon, the first shimmer of sun touching palm groves and mud brick walls. For those who lived along the Nile, time was not a straight line, but a circle of rising and setting, of planting and harvesting, of living and dying, each cycle flowing like the river itself. The Nile was Egypt's artery, carrying not only water, but belief, and every drop spoke of eternity. On its banks, reeds whispered in the wind. Fishermen stood barefoot in small papyrus skiffs, casting nets that glimmered in the morning light. In the fields beyond, men and women stooped low, pressing seeds into moist earth, while children drove oxen through furrows. The river promised grain, but it also promised something deeper, a mirror of life that would continue beyond death. Every flood was sacred. The inundation, when the Nile swelled with silt from distant Ethiopian highlands, covered the fields in black earth so fertile that Egyptians called it Kemet, the Black Land. Beyond the reach of the waters stretched the Deshret, the Red Land, the empty desert, the land of silence and of eternity. The contrast was more than geography, it was philosophy. For the Egyptians, the fertile floodplain symbolized life, and the desert symbolized death. Yet both were necessary, both part of the same whole. To cross from one to the other was not an ending, but a continuation of the same rhythm. Even the direction of the Nile shaped their sense of eternity. Unlike most rivers, the Nile flowed from south to north. The Egyptians called the south Upper Egypt and the north Lower Egypt, not by height, but by the flow of water. This reversal puzzled foreigners, but to Egyptians, it was a sign of divine order. The river's journey northward, ending in the wide delta, mirrored the soul's own journey, a path of movement, of transformation, always toward the eternal sea of stars. At night, when the desert cooled, farmers rested on rooftops under wide skies. They traced constellations across the heavens, mapping Orion, whom they called Sa, and Sirius, the bright star Sopdet, whose rising marked the new year, heralding the flood. To gaze upward was to see the same truth as the river revealed. Life flowed into death, and death into life again. Pharaohs embraced this cycle most visibly. Their tombs, colossal and eternal, were built not to defy death, but to join its rhythm. The pyramid was a stairway to the heavens, a bridge between the land of the living and the field of reeds, the eternal paradise. But farmers, too, lived within the same belief. In humble graves, bodies rested with amulets, jars of grain, and small clay figurines called shabti. These were not luxuries of kings, but necessities of the soul. The shabti were servants for the afterlife, figurines inscribed with spells from the book of coming forth by day. They promised to labor for the dead in the next world so that rest might be eternal. Thus, both pharaoh and farmer prepared for passage. The scale of wealth differed, but the hope remained the same: to rise again with the sun, to sail upon the Nile of the afterlife, to find eternity in fields that never withered. Every evening, the sun slid westward, The Egyptians saw the western horizon as sacred, a gateway to the land of the dead. Tombs were built on the western bank where the sun descended. The living remained on the eastern bank where the sun rose. This was not mere convenience, but cosmic geography. To live in the east, to rest in the west, this mirrored the sun's eternal journey. The horizon itself, glowing each morning and evening, was not just a line between sky and earth. It was a threshold. The Egyptians called it the Akhet, a place of becoming, a place of passage. Every sunrise was rebirth, every sunset was descent. The sun god Ra traveled this path endlessly, sailing by day across the heavens and by night through the underworld, fighting darkness, only to rise again renewed. And so the people saw their lives the same way. Each death was a sunset, each burial a descent, and each soul, like the sun, awaited the dawn of eternal rising. Sand shifted softly across stone. The river moved without haste, carrying silt, carrying time. Priests murmured prayers in cool temples, their voices echoing against columns carved with lotus and papyrus. Farmers lit small lamps of oil, watching shadows flicker against their mud brick walls. The Nile's rhythm became the rhythm of breathing. Inhale with the flood, exhale with the drought, inhale with birth, exhale with death. It was a rhythm so deep, so constant, that it carried even the heaviest of hearts. And as the horizon dimmed in fading gold, the river stretched endlessly onward. Its waters carried grain, memory, and faith, flowing not only to the sea, but to the unspoken promise of elsewhere. The air inside the temple was cool, still as stone, where columns rose like forests of papyrus. In shadowed silence, priests whispered hymns that echoed like wind through reeds. Here, belief itself became architecture. Carved walls told the story of a soul's passage. Painted figures moved in quiet procession, their colors preserved by dry desert air. And in the deepest chamber, beneath painted ceilings of stars, the great judgment unfolded. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not an end, but a trial to be faced with courage and truth. The soul, called the Ba, carried memory and personality. The vital spark, called the Ka, remained hungry for offerings, and the heart, the Ib, was the center of thought, conscience, and being. It was the heart, not the brain, that bore responsibility for a life lived. In the Hall of Two Truths, the heart stood trial. Before Osiris, Lord of the underworld, and before 42 divine judges, a soul declared innocence. This declaration was known as the negative confession. It was not a single statement, but a litany, a gentle unraveling of a life. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not slain unjustly. I have not polluted the river. One by one, the soul claimed purity before each judge, and then came the moment that none could escape, the weighing. At the center stood a great balance, a scale with two pans. On one side, the heart. On the other, the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at was more than a goddess. She was balance, justice, cosmic harmony. Her feather was truth itself, light as breath, yet heavier than lies. If the heart weighed the same as the feather, the soul was pure. It might enter the eternal field of reeds, a paradise of endless harvests, where family reunited and the Nile's waters never failed. But if the heart grew heavy with falsehood, the scale tipped, and waiting nearby was Ammit, the devourer. Part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus, Ammit did not torment. She ended. The soul was consumed, denied eternity, cast into nothingness. This fate was dreaded more than pain, for it was oblivion, a second death, the death of memory itself. priests prepared the dead for this trial with careful rituals and sacred texts. Among the most intricate was the spell of the heart scarab, a green scarab amulet, often carved from stone like jasper or serpentine, was placed over the chest of the mummy. On its underside, inscribed in hieroglyphs, were words of protection. "O my heart, do not stand against me as witness. Do not oppose me before the judges. Do not reveal what I have done." This was not deception, but a plea for mercy. The Egyptians knew that no one lived without fault. The scarab, glowing green like new growth, was a prayer that truth might be weighed with compassion. Many of these scarabs survive, resting today in quiet museum cases. Some bear the fingerprints of the craftsmen who carved them more than 3,000 years ago. Each one was once pressed to a chest in stillness, waiting for the moment of balance. Priests in life prepared the dead for judgment. They recited hymns in low, measured tones. Each verse, each rhythm, was meant to guide the soul through the unseen halls. The Book of the Dead, called by the Egyptians the Book of Coming Forth by Day, contained these hymns and spells. Some were written on long rolls of papyrus, laid beside the body. Others were painted on coffins or carved into stone walls. The words were maps of the afterlife. They named the gates a soul would pass through, the guardians it would face, the words of power it must recite. For the ancient Egyptians, speech itself was power. To name something was to hold it. To recite truth was to survive. And so the priests wrote carefully, each hieroglyph carved with steady hands, each image of the judgment scene drawn again and again across centuries. Imagine the hush of that eternal hall, the soft glow of oil lamps, the faint rustle of linen as a priest leaned over papyrus, the breath of incense curling in the air. In this place, the living rehearsed for their own death, even as they guided others through it. They believed the heart remembered everything, every kindness, every cruelty, every word spoken aloud, and every silence chosen. There was no hiding in the hall of Osiris, but there was also no need for fear if one had lived in harmony with Ma'at, in balance with river and desert, with neighbor and kin. The scales waited for all, pharaoh and scribe, farmer and fisherman. No life was too small, no heart too unimportant to pass through the hall of judgment. And so the scales remained, silent in painted chambers, their arms trembling in eternal balance. The feather rested, light as truth, waiting for the weight of another heart. In the hush of a tomb chamber, where oil lamps flickered against painted walls, a roll of papyrus lay across folded arms. Its fibers, pressed from the reeds of the Nile, held more than ink. They held directions to eternity. Outside, the desert whispered with wind. Inside, the dead slept in linen wrappings. And between them, in careful script, the journey of the soul was written. The Egyptians called it not the Book of the Dead, but the Book of Coming Forth by Day. For them, death was not descent into night, but emergence into a greater light. Each scroll was a map, not a single fixed book, but a collection of chapters and spells chosen for each individual. One papyrus might hold 75 spells, another might hold 150. No two were alike. They were guides for a soul navigating the afterlife, a vast and complex landscape filled with gates, rivers, guardians, and trials. The afterlife was not a single destination, but a journey requiring knowledge, memory, and care. Papyrus leaves, cut thin and laid in crossing layers, formed long sheets. When glued together, They stretched into rolls that could reach over 40 feet. Onto these sheets, scribes painted lines of hieroglyphs, sometimes illustrated with vignettes, small pictures of the soul's progress. A god might be drawn opening a gate. A soul might be shown sailing in a boat of reeds. The balance of the scales appeared again, with the heart set against the feather of Ma'at. These images were not decoration. They were part of the spell. To see them was to remember, and to remember was to survive. Scribes were the quiet architects of eternity. Sitting cross-legged with palettes of reed brushes, they dipped into ink made of soot and ochre. Black for words, red for headings, names of gods, or phrases of power. Each stroke was deliberate. A single missed sign could shift a meaning. To inscribe a name incorrectly was to risk a soul. To omit a god was to leave a gate unguarded. Accuracy was devotion. Care was reverence. Some scribes worked in temple workshops, copying scrolls that could be adapted for many burials. Others created personal commissions, with the name of the deceased written again and again, ensuring it would be spoken, ensuring it would not be forgotten. For the Egyptians, to erase a name was the greatest punishment. To write it carefully was an act of eternal preservation. Among the most famous papyri is the papyrus of Ani, a richly illustrated scroll dating to around 1250 BCE. It stretched nearly 80 feet in length. Within it were 78 spells, each painted with color still vivid today. But lesser known are the shorter papyri, created for those who could not afford such grandeur. Some contained only a few essential chapters. One common choice was spell 125, the declaration of innocence before the 42 judges. Another was the spell for the heart scarab, pleading for mercy during the weighing. Even the simplest papyrus, tucked beside a humble burial, was seen as a lantern in darkness. No matter the length, the words carried the same hope, that the soul might come forth by day, shining with the sunrise, joining Ra in his endless voyage. The scrolls included chapters to open gates, to repel serpents, to cross rivers guarded by demons, to speak the names of secret doors. Some spells were charms of transformation. The soul might become a falcon to soar across the sky, or a lotus to rise renewed from the waters, or a heron to step through marshes with long, graceful strides. These were not fantasies, but ways of expressing renewal, resilience, and the freedom to move beyond the body. The Book of Coming Forth was not simply about protection. It was about orientation. It reminded the soul that the journey was navigable, that each challenge could be met with knowledge, that no trial was endless. In some burials, the scroll was placed within the coffin itself. In others, it was set in a small wooden box, carefully tucked beside jars of food and clothing. Occasionally, instead of papyrus, the texts were written directly onto the linen wrappings of the mummy, or painted across the walls of the tomb. Wherever they appeared, the purpose remained constant: to keep the words near the soul, so they might be spoken when the time came. For the Egyptians, words were not mere records, they were living things. Hieroglyphs of snakes were sometimes drawn broken or incomplete, lest they spring alive upon the reader. Hieroglyphs of eyes looked outward, watching across centuries. The text was presence, not just remembrance. Picture the papyrus unrolled in the quiet of the tomb, its fibers dry, its ink dark against pale yellow. A line of hieroglyphs glimmers faintly in the lamplight, each sign a door, each word a step. The tomb is silent, yet the scroll speaks, It murmurs to the still air, to the linen-wrapped body, to the waiting soul. Do not be afraid. Here is the gate. Here is the spell. Here is the way forward. The Egyptians believed that with these words, no soul was lost in darkness. The book was not an end, but a beginning. Not a farewell, but a map of return. And so the scrolls remain, rolled and resting in silence, ink still whispering after 3,000 years. Each one a lantern, each one a path, waiting to be read again in the halls of night. Beneath the desert's surface, through corridors carved in silence, the air grew cooler, the light dimmed to lamp glow, and walls began to shimmer with painted worlds. Here, deep in the Valley of the Kings, stone chambers were not prisons of death, but mirrors of the cosmos. Tombs became sky maps, palaces of eternity, where stars and suns never set. The Egyptians believed that to die was to embark on a celestial voyage. The body rested in stone, but the soul sailed among stars. To guide that passage, walls of tombs were painted and carved with images of the heavens. Gods and constellations stretched across ceilings, their outlines traced in pigments of deep lapis and gold. The dead lay not beneath stone, but beneath the turning sky. The tomb of Pharaoh Seti I, carved in the 13th century BCE, is among the most remarkable. Across its ceiling sprawls the Book of the Heavenly Cow, a myth in which the goddess Nut arches her star-filled body over the earth. Her limbs touch horizon to horizon, a living vault of night. Within her form, the sun god Ra travels each day and night, reborn at dawn, swallowed at dusk, and carried safely through darkness to rise again. These painted ceilings were not decoration, but cosmology made visible. They showed the dead where they were and where they were going. Every pigment chosen had meaning. Lapis lazuli, imported from distant Afghanistan, was ground into deep blue, the very color of night, the skin of the sky goddess Nut. Ochre, drawn from desert earth, gave warmth of red and gold, the hues of the sun and the eternal desert. Malachite, bright green, spoke of rebirth, the shoots of papyrus and lotus rising after the flood. And gold leaf, shimmering even in lamplight, was the flesh of the gods themselves. It was incorruptible, untarnished, a symbol of eternity. To enter such a chamber was to step into the cosmos itself. Every wall, every ceiling was a mirror of creation's first dawn. Among the most profound texts carved into tomb walls was the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld. It described the 12 hours of night, each hour a gate, each gate guarded, each challenge unique. The sun god Ra, sailing in his bark, was shown moving through these hours, bringing light even to the deepest darkness. Few outside Egypt knew of these texts, for they were hidden in tombs, reserved for pharaohs and high priests. It was not until 1816, when explorers entered the tomb of Thutmose III, that the Amduat came fully to light. Its images were both haunting and serene. Rows of stars, endless and regular, lined the walls like a celestial clock. Figures of serpents, sun discs, and gods of the underworld guided the reader step by step. For Egyptians, to carve these words into stone was to make the journey real, a map inscribed into the very bones of the earth. The tomb was not simply a chamber for the body. It was a model of the universe itself. The burial chamber was the womb of Nut, the night sky. The sarcophagus was the body of Osiris, god of rebirth. The painted walls were the waters of creation, the nun from which the first mound of earth rose. By entering the tomb, the deceased entered the cosmos again. Death was not a fall into nothingness, but a return to the first moment of light, the beginning of creation, repeated for each soul. The pyramid texts, among the earliest sacred writings, echoed this idea. They promised the king would rise to the heavens, climb to the sky on the ladder of Osiris, ascend on the smoke of incense, join the circumpolar stars that never set. The tomb, in its silence, was alive with this promise. The Egyptians looked not to all stars, but to a special few. The circumpolar stars, those that never dipped below the horizon, were known as the imperishable ones. They circled endlessly around the northern sky, visible every night of the year. Unlike other stars, they never vanished into underworld darkness. For this reason, they became symbols of eternal survival. Kings hoped to join them. Texts carved into tomb walls called upon the soul to rise as an imperishable one, to shine in the sky unceasingly, to never die again. When priests painted these constellations above the sarcophagus, they gave the dead a new sky. Even in the sealed silence of stone, the stars shone unblinking. Imagine standing in such a chamber. A single oil lamp flickers, casting shadows against painted gods. The ceiling above glitters with stars in gold and blue. The walls stretch with lines of hieroglyphs, like flowing rivers of meaning. You breathe the cool stillness. You feel the weight of stone. And yet the chamber does not close in. It opens outward, beyond earth, beyond sand, into eternity. For the Egyptians, the tomb was never confinement. It was expansion. It was the cosmos mirrored in stone, where the soul might recognize its path and walk among stars. And so the ceilings of night remained, painted deep within hidden chambers, their constellations waiting in silence. The stars watched unblinking, their light flickering softly across eternity. The desert kept its secrets well. Beyond the fertile fields of the Nile, where the red land rose in silent ridges, narrow paths wound toward hidden valleys. Here, away from crowded towns and noisy markets, men and women lived in small clusters of stone houses. Their lives were not marked by monuments above ground, but by the invisible labor that filled the mountains within. These were the workers of eternity, the quiet hands who carved the tombs of kings. The village of Deir el-Medina lay on the west bank of the Nile, opposite the ancient city of Thebes. It was a modest settlement, a line of rectangular houses built close together, with walls of mud brick and streets no wider than a cart. Yet from this simple village came the craftsmen who created the Valley of the Kings. They were organized into crews, each with foremen, scribes, and guardians. They worked in shifts, spending 10 days in the valley, then 2 days returning home to families. Inside the tomb corridors, their tools sang in rhythm. The ring of copper chisels, the scrape of dolerite pounders, the hiss of pigment ground on stone pallets. Stone cutters hollowed the rock, chiseling corridors deeper and deeper into limestone cliffs. Plasterers smoothed the walls. Painters, guided by master draftsmen, covered them with scenes of gods and journeys. Priests added words of power, writing spells to guide the king's soul. Each role was vital. Each hand carried eternity into stone. Life in Deir el-Medina was structured and steady. The workers received rations from the state: bread, beer, dried fish, onions, and occasionally meat. Wages came not in coins, but in grain, measured in sacks of barley. Their homes were small, but they were filled with painted pots, woven mats, and household shrines. In courtyards, women ground grain or tended children. In the evenings, Families gathered at low tables, lamps flickering as neighbors spoke across the narrow lanes. Though their work touched kings, their lives were close-knit and ordinary. They wrote letters to one another, some playful, some tender, recorded in ink on shards of pottery called ostraca. One surviving note reads, "Send me the garment quickly, for the feast is at hand." Another pleads for medicine. Another, more weary, complains of the foreman's demands. Through these fragments, the silent workers still whisper their daily lives. One of the most remarkable discoveries from Deir el-Medina is not only the tombs, but the records of labor disputes. In the reign of Ramses III, workers stopped carving and painting. Their rations had not been delivered. Hunger spread through the village. So they laid down their tools and marched to the temples of Thebes, demanding payment. This event, recorded on papyrus, is the earliest known labor strike in history. Their voices, though humble, echoed through the halls of power. Even those who carved kings' resting places needed bread, needed justice, and their strike was successful. Rations resumed, and the work of eternity continued. The workers of Deir el-Medina lived with knowledge that could never be spoken. They alone knew the hidden turns of the tombs, the places where treasures rested, the passages sealed forever. To protect this, guards patrolled the valley. The villagers were bound by oath and by trust, yet even secrecy was fragile. Centuries later, some tombs would be robbed, their treasures scattered. But within the workers' lifetimes, their silence held. They carved not for wealth of their own, but for a vision larger than themselves, the safe passage of a king's soul. Inside the mountain, work was slow and exact. A line was measured in red ochre, then corrected in black. Chisels chipped steadily, removing stone in small layers. Once walls were prepared, draftsmen sketched figures of gods and spirits. Artists filled them with color, blue for the sky, green for rebirth, gold for the divine. The air smelled of pigment, resin, and lamp smoke. Dust settled in hair and cloth. But to the workers, this was sacred labor. Every stroke was an offering. Every color was a prayer. When a corridor was finished, priests entered to consecrate the space. They chanted hymns, burned incense, and blessed the walls. Thus, stone and pigment became more than art. They became the eternal map of a soul. As evening came, the workers left the tomb's darkness and climbed back to their village. The cliffs glowed red in fading sun. Shadows lengthened across the valley floor. In their houses, lamps were lit. The smell of baking bread rose in the night air. Children laughed in narrow lanes. Women drew water from nearby wells. The men set down their chisels, washed dust from their hands, and sat quietly in courtyards, listening to the breeze moving through desert hills. Their names were not carved in stone like the pharaohs, but their hands built eternity itself. And in their silence, their devotion remained. And so, the valleys kept their secret sounds, the echo of chisels, the whisper of brushes, the hymns of priests lingering in stone. Each stroke carried prayers into rock, still vibrating softly beneath desert sands. The desert sun burned bright upon the living, but in tombs and temples, other lights glimmered softly. The gleam of beads, the sheen of polished stone, the shimmer of charms meant for eternity. They were small in size, often no larger than a fingertip. Yet for the ancient Egyptians, they carried the strength of gods, woven into necklaces, bracelets, or tucked gently among the linen of the dead. These were the amulets and charms, silent guardians of the body, and the soul. In the workshops of Thebes and Memphis, craftsmen prepared faience, a glazed material of crushed quartz, ground fine, mixed with copper salts, then fired until it shone with turquoise brilliance. This humble mixture became the skin of the gods. It caught the light like the Nile at noon, and it was shaped into countless forms. A scarab beetle, carved with delicate legs, was more than an insect of the earth. It represented Khepri, the morning sun rolling upward from darkness. To wear a scarab was to carry renewal. An ankh, shaped like a looped cross, stood for life everlasting. Placed on the chest of the dead, it was a promise that breath would return. An eye of Horus, with painted pupil and curling lines, guarded against harm. Its gaze, unblinking, saw through lies, and it was said to heal as well as to protect. A Tayat knot, the knot of Isis, resembled flowing cloth. Its deep red color symbolized blood and protection. It was bound to the body to shield it with the goddess's love. Each amulet was more than ornament. It was a prayer in physical form, a fragment of divine power carried close to the skin. When a body was prepared for burial, amulets were laid among the linen. The wrappings did not simply cover. They layered symbols into silence, weaving protection as carefully as cloth itself. The Book of the Dead described which amulet to use and where to place it. A heart scarab, often large, was set upon the chest. It bore inscriptions pleading to the heart, "Do not rise as a witness against me." A jed pillar, symbol of Osiris's spine, was tied near the back, so the body would rise steady and whole. The Shabti figures, though not true amulets, were placed nearby, ready to labor in the fields of the afterlife so the deceased might rest. In this layering of charms, death became less frightening. The soul was shielded from harm, guided through trials, and wrapped in the comfort of divine signs. Among the many amulets, one of the most intriguing was the girdle of Isis. Made of red jasper, shaped like a simple band or loop, it was tied around the body during burial. It was believed to bring the protection of the goddess's blood, to safeguard rebirth. Another lesser-known form was the two fingers amulet. Carved in stone or faience, it resembled two joined human fingers. It symbolized the hand of Anubis, guiding the embalming process. Placed near the wound left by mummification, it was meant to heal, to restore the body's wholeness. Even the smallest shapes carried meaning. A frog stood for fertility. A fly, surprisingly, was worn by soldiers, representing persistence in battle. A fish amulet protected children from drowning in the Nile. Every creature, every color, every gesture of form became part of Egypt's quiet language of protection. In the heart of villages and cities, artisans sat with baskets of raw stone. They ground carnelian until it glowed red, cut lapis into fragments of sky, and polished amethyst until it shimmered purple. Others preferred faience for its lightness and brilliance. The kilns burned hot, their smoke curling over rooftops. Inside, molds of scarabs and eyes were arranged. When fired, they emerged gleaming, ready to string into necklaces or to tuck into a burial shroud. The artisans worked not in silence alone. Often, they recited prayers, believing the words would bind to the charm. Some signed their names in tiny hieroglyphs hidden beneath a scarab. Most remained anonymous, their devotion absorbed into the object itself. And so, countless hands, now forgotten, fashioned eternity into beads. Color itself carried power. To the Egyptians, pigments were not decoration, but essence. Green stood for life, vegetation, and rebirth. A green amulet could revive the body. Blue was the color of the sky, of the primeval waters. Blue faience linked the soul to creation itself. Red, the hue of jasper or carnelian, evoked blood and protection, but also the fierce fire of the desert. Gold, never tarnishing, was the flesh of the gods. Few could wear it, but when it was placed in tombs, it declared divinity. Thus, the colors of amulets were not chosen for beauty alone, but for their silent voices. Each pigment spoke. Each shade whispered a prayer. As the centuries passed, amulets multiplied in number. They were worn by nobles and farmers, by children and by kings. Some were costly, set in gold and precious stone. Others were humble, made of faience, given freely to the poor. But in each case, their meaning endured. They were companions in life and guardians in death. Imagine a body lying in stillness, wrapped in countless folds of linen. Between the layers, a scarab rests, an ankh glimmers, a knot lies soft and red. Together, they form a constellation woven not in stars, but in beads and stone. The body slept, but it was never unprotected. It dreamed beneath symbols of dawn, waiting for the light of the next world. And still beneath the sands, amulets glisten in the dark, scarabs, eyes, and knots holding silent watch. Each bead, each charm, still carries its secret flame of protection, waiting for the soul to stir once more. Beneath the glow of oil lamps, the air grew heavy with incense and resin. Stone walls enclosed the chamber, keeping out the desert wind, keeping in the whispers of priests at work. Here, in the hush of ritual, the human body began its slow transformation. Flesh became memory, and silence became eternity. This was the art of mummification, a labor of reverence, a conversation between the living and the divine. The process was long, stretching across 70 days. It began with washing, as sacred water from the Nile was poured gently over the body. Lotus oils softened the skin, and prayers accompanied each movement. Then came the delicate task of preservation. Through a small incision, the internal organs were carefully removed. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines were not discarded. They were wrapped and placed in canopic jars, each guarded by a divine protector. Imseti, human-headed, watched over the liver. Hapi, the baboon, protected the lungs. Duamutef, the jackal, safeguarded the stomach. Kebesenuef, the falcon, kept the intestines secure. Together, these four sons of Horus stood eternal watch over the most fragile parts of being. The heart, however, was left in place, the seat of thought and memory, the witness of truth. For in the halls of Osiris, the heart alone would be weighed. The brain was drawn out carefully, its role in life not understood, its presence in eternity not required. Through the nose it was removed, a quiet act beneath the chanting of priests. The body, now hollowed, was filled with natron, a natural salt gathered from dry lake beds. Natron absorbed moisture, preserving flesh, stilling decay. 40 days would pass, the desert air mingling with the quiet grains of salt, until the form was ready for its next stage. When the natron was brushed away, the body was anointed with oils. Cedar, myrrh, and frankincense left their fragrance in the air. Resins sealed the skin, dark and glistening under the flicker of lamplight. These substances were not chosen at random. Each carried power. Myrrh purified, cedar preserved, frankincense rose like prayer itself. Thus, the scent of the embalming chamber was the scent of eternity. Even centuries later, Archaeologists noted the lingering fragrance within sealed tombs. It was as though the past still breathed through oils hardened into time. Now came the long labor of linen. Roll upon roll, yard upon yard, the cloth wound slowly around the limbs. Each finger wrapped, each toe bound, each arm crossed in silence. The wrappings were not mere coverings. They were layers of prayer. Between folds, priests placed amulets, a scarab at the heart, an ankh at the chest, a knot of Isis near the abdomen. Each placement carried a spell, each knot sealed with a chant. Words spoken softly, sometimes written directly on the linen, bound the body in language as tightly as in cloth. The mouth and eyes were veiled, yet spells promised they would open again in the next world. When the final bandage encircled the head, the body appeared not as flesh, but as vessel, prepared for the long journey. Some mummies, especially of the elite, were given painted masks of cartonnage, layers of linen glued with plaster, shaped and gilded with gold leaf. The mask was not only decoration, it was meant to be the eternal face, a likeness the soul could recognize. Even more delicate were the texts written on strips of linen themselves. These spells, wrapped directly into the shroud, were invisible once in place. The body carried secret words that no living eyes would ever read again. One mummy discovered at Deir el-Bahri had nearly 200 such spells woven into its wrappings. The body became a scroll, a hidden library of magic sleeping in silence. This sacred labor was guided by priests of Anubis. Wearing jackal masks, they performed rites at each stage, their voices low, their movements steady. The chief embalmer was known as the one who knows the heart. His knowledge was both practical and divine. He understood anatomy and ritual alike, the physical needs of preservation and the spiritual demands of eternity. Other priests read from sacred texts, their chants mingling with the rustle of linen. Each step was surrounded by words, for words themselves were thought to carry power, binding spirit and body together. Imagine the chamber at dusk. The oil lamps tremble with thin flame. The scent of resin hangs heavy, sweet, and sharp. The stone walls echo faintly, but voices remain hushed. Outside, the desert cools. Inside, time slows. Hands fold linen again and again until the body is almost hidden from memory. There is no rush. 70 days allow for patience. Each moment is careful, each gesture deliberate. It is as though silence itself wraps tighter than cloth. At last, when the wrappings are complete, the body is placed within coffins, sometimes nested, one inside another, wooden forms painted with gods and prayers. The innermost might show the face of the deceased, eyes outlined in black coal, lips painted with red ochre. The outermost might gleam with gold, a reminder of divine flesh. Together, they formed not a coffin, but a sanctuary. The body inside was not seen as empty. It was a vessel, holding life in stillness, holding eternity in waiting. And so the embalming chamber, once filled with motion, fell to silence. The soul's journey had not ended, but begun. Outside, the Nile continued to flow. Seasons turned, fields greened, then withered, then greened again. But inside the tombs, the mummies lay in stillness, their linen tight, their resin hard, their amulets watching. To the Egyptians, this was not lifelessness, it was preparation. The body remained a home, waiting for the Ka to return, for the Ba to take flight, for the eternal cycle to complete. Thus, the whisper of mummification was never only about death, it was about the return, the eternal rhythm, the body preserved as vessel of dawn, and beneath the sands they still rest, wrapped in silence, guarded by jars, scented faintly of resin. The linen whispers, the masks gleam, and the eternal body waits, hidden beyond the reach of time. The desert night stretched wide and still. Stars shone sharp above the cliffs of Thebes, and in the silence, a line of torches flickered, their flames bending gently in the wind. This was no ordinary walk in darkness. It was a procession, a movement of memory, a bridge of fire leading the living to the dead. The air smelled faintly of oil and incense. Sand crunched beneath slow footsteps. The procession carried with it a weight of reverence, a weight of centuries. At the heart of these rituals was the belief that the dead did not vanish. They rested, but they also required care. Priests led the way, their linen robes catching glimmers of torchlight. They carried hymns like soft wind, words drifting upward into the star-filled sky. The opening of the mouth ritual, performed at the tomb's entrance, ensured the dead could breathe again, could eat, could speak in the afterlife. A sculpted statue or the mummy itself was touched with sacred tools, an adze of copper, a spoon of gold, a wand shaped like a jackal's paw. Each gesture reopened the senses, awakening the vessel of eternity. Families followed behind, bearing offerings on trays, bread baked in round loaves, beer brewed from barley, figs, dates, onions, sometimes cuts of meat or fish. These were not luxuries, but necessities, gifts that fed the ka, the life force of the departed. At the threshold of the tomb, the food was placed carefully. Some would remain, others would be consumed by priests, their eating considered a sacred act that transmitted nourishment to the spirit. The torches mattered as much as the hymns. For Egyptians, light itself was divine. The sun was Ra, daily defeating darkness. To bring flame into a tomb was to guide the soul through its own night. Walls painted with stars reflected the flicker of the fire. Gold leaf gleamed briefly and vanished again into shadow. The desert outside was cool and still, but inside the tomb, the light pressed against silence, reminding all present that darkness was never final. In some burial rites, small models of boats were carried, representing the solar bark of Ra. Just as the sun god traveled across the sky by day and through the underworld by night, so too would the deceased sail with divine company. Other offerings included shabti figurines, small servant statues inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead. If called upon in the afterlife to plow or harvest, the shabti would answer in place of the deceased. These objects were more than symbols. They were quiet assurances, small companions for eternity. The priests' voices carried softly in the night. Hymns to Osiris, Lord of the underworld, filled the air. His resurrection was a promise. As he rose after death, so too would the faithful. The chants were not hurried. They moved like water, slow, measured, repeating. Each line was a rhythm of comfort, soothing the living, strengthening the dead. Sometimes drums and sistrums, rattles of metal and shell, joined the procession. Their sounds shimmered against the cliffs, a music of stone and night. At the mouth of the tomb, families knelt. Mothers placed their palms on the ground. Fathers whispered words to the still air. Children watched the torches with wide, uncertain eyes. For them, the boundary was thin. The loved one was gone from sight, yet present in ritual. A loaf of bread, a jar of beer, became the bridge across absence. Some families returned again and again, long after the burial was complete. Tombs were not sealed memories. They were visited, spoken to, tended with food and flowers. Even a simple act, pouring cool water on the ground, was seen as refreshment for the spirit. To neglect the dead was unthinkable, for memory itself was nourishment. Inside the tomb, the walls told the sky's story. Paintings of Ra in his bark, of Osiris enthroned, of stars scattered like endless seed. The flames from the procession's torches made these images waver. Gods seemed to breathe, stars seemed to flicker. The tomb was not empty stone. It was alive with symbols, alive with prayers. The voices of priests rose and fell. The air was thick with resin and smoke. Each sound lingered, echoing against carved pillars, settling into silence again. It was said that to speak the name of the dead was to make them live once more. So names were chanted, slowly, drawn out like music, restoring the soul with every syllable. As the last offerings were placed, the procession began to withdraw. Torches flickered one final time against painted ceilings. Shadows stretched long, then disappeared into night. The desert waited, silent and vast. The stars above shone indifferent, but to the families, they were reminders of the eternal sky. Step by step, the sound of sandals on stone faded. The tomb returned to stillness. Only the offerings remained, bread and beer resting in bowls, smoke from incense curling upward, vanishing into the hidden air. And so the desert night held its breath. Torches died to embers, priests fell to silence, families walked homeward through the sand. Yet within the tomb, light still lingered on painted stars. Offerings still glowed with unseen meaning. And in the deep hush, the eternal journey waited, quiet, patient, unending. Night draped itself across the desert plateau. The pyramids loomed like darkened mountains, their angles cutting silently into the starlit sky. The air was still, but the stones seemed to hum with memory. Every block, every carving, held whispers of kings who sought to live beyond the limits of flesh. Here, the line between man and eternity was blurred, and pharaohs breathed as stars. Pharaohs of Egypt were not only rulers, they were gods in human form, children of Ra, heirs of Osiris, guardians of Ma'at, the sacred order of the world. Their reign did not end in death. It shifted, transformed into a journey beyond time. The pyramid texts, inscribed deep inside burial chambers from the Old Kingdom onward, whispered instructions for this passage. They spoke of the king ascending as a falcon into the sky, joining the sun god's bark, sailing each day across the heavens. The stars above were not merely lights. They were dwellings, celestial homes for departed rulers. The imperishable stars of the northern sky, those that never set, were imagined as the resting place of kings. To join them was to secure an unending cycle of light. In life and after, a pharaoh's name mattered more than gold. It was preserved in a cartouche, an oval ring, a protective circle of eternity. To carve a name was to preserve existence. To erase a name was to destroy it. This belief lay behind acts of both reverence and vengeance. When Seti Thorn's name was spoken, his presence lingered in temples. When Akhenaten's name was chiseled away by those who rejected his reforms, his memory was intended to fade, like a flame snuffed by wind. But many names endured. Ramses, Hatshepsut, Thutmose, they echoed through corridors of stone, whispered survival against the silence of centuries. The Egyptians knew stone could see. Statues were not lifeless forms, but vessels for presence. Eyes carved wide and unblinking watched the offerings brought before them. lips shaped in eternal calm, were ready to speak in another realm. The colossal statues of pharaohs, the seated figures of Abu Simbel, the stern gaze of Amenhotep III's colossi were more than monuments. They were embodiments, anchors of spirit in the world of the living. A king might pass from flesh, but the statue remained, watching the sun rise each morning, listening to hymns carried by desert winds, enduring floods of the Nile and footsteps of pilgrims. In the Pyramid of Unas, the last king of the 5th dynasty, we find the earliest pyramid texts. Among them lies a spell that describes the king devouring the gods, absorbing their power, becoming one with their divinity. This imagery, though startling to modern ears, was not violent but symbolic. It was the assurance that the king would not diminish in the afterlife. Instead, he absorbed eternity itself. The king became Ra's companion, Osiris's heir, the child of Nut, the sky goddess who swallowed the sun each night and birthed it anew at dawn. Burial chambers glowed with painted stars. Texts along the walls read like maps of the heavens. Amulets, scepters, and crowns rested beside the pharaoh's body, not as ornaments, but as tools of transformation. The crook and flail, symbols of kingship, ensured command in the afterlife. A headrest amulet promised awakening. Golden sandals carried the ruler's steps along hidden paths of the Duat. Each object breathed eternity into the tomb. Each word of a hymn became a bridge across silence. The air was thick with resin and incense. The linen wrappings were layered with prayer. And in that stillness, the body was remade, a vessel not of flesh, but of everlasting form. To the Egyptians, the pharaoh was not only eternal as a soul, he was eternal as a principle. As long as kingship endured, so did Ma'at, the balance of the cosmos. Even when a specific ruler died, the institution of pharaoh lived on. Each successor was a continuation, a thread unbroken, a chain that tied earth to heaven. This is why coronation rituals mirrored funerary ones. Each new pharaoh was a rebirth, a return of the same cosmic presence. It was less a matter of one life, more the eternal recurrence of kingship itself. The desert night deepened. The pyramids stood unmoved, their shadows lengthening into silence. Above them, the imperishable stars turned slowly, unblinking, untiring. One could imagine the kings among them, shining softly, watching Egypt sleep by the Nile, their names still spoken, their statues still standing. The breath of eternity was quiet, but it was steady. It moved through stone, through hieroglyphs, through the unbroken gaze of carved eyes. And so the pharaohs did not end. They rose beyond time, their names caught in circles of stone, their souls drifting as stars. The night sky above Egypt still holds their promise, that order endures, that kingship does not fade, that the gaze of eternity remains. The desert stretched wide and unbroken, its sand shimmering like waves in moonlight. By day, the heat carried mirages. By night, only silence remained, a silence so deep it seemed to sink beneath the earth. Here, beneath the shifting dunes and cliffs, stone corridors still slept, their doors sealed, their echoes forgotten. Yet within, the chambers of the dead remained as they were left, hidden, patient, untouched by torch or breath. For the ancient Egyptians, a tomb was more than a burial place. It was a chamber of transformation, a vessel to ferry the soul into eternity. The Valley of the Kings, with its limestone cliffs and hidden ravines, was carved into a secret city of the dead. No pyramids here, no towering peaks to draw attention. Instead, tunnels wound deep into rock, designed to shield the pharaoh's journey from the reach of time and the grasp of thieves. Walls bloomed with color, stories painted in ochre, blue, and gold. Gods with animal heads, celestial boats, spells from the Book of the Dead. Each detail guided the departed through the dangerous night of the Duat. And yet, not every chamber was found. Not every tomb was opened. Many still rest, dark and sealed, beneath the desert's weight. Imagine the chambers not yet revealed. Lamps have never burned there. The air inside has remained untouched for thousands of years, still dry, heavy with incense turned to dust. In such silence, amulets lie nestled beside linen, gold leaf clings to wooden shrines, and papyrus scrolls whisper spells no living ear has heard. Even discovered tombs hint at the scale. When Howard Carter opened the door to Tutankhamun's resting place in 1922, he found walls packed with objects, thrones and chariots, boxes filled with food offerings, garlands of dried flowers, and the boy king's golden mask gleaming like the sun reborn. If such treasures were hidden with a ruler who reigned only briefly, what secrets must lie with kings of greater power, still waiting, still sealed? In 2015, radar scans of Tutankhamun's tomb suggested that another chamber might lie beyond its walls. Some proposed it could belong to Nefertiti, the elusive queen whose burial remains one of Egypt's enduring mysteries. While debate continues, the very possibility reminds us Egypt still hides secrets. Even now, in an age of satellites and lasers, the earth keeps its chambers close, refusing to yield them easily. And so the desert waits, quietly holding what we have not yet seen. The hidden tomb was more than storage. It was the body's mirror, the Ka's sanctuary. The Egyptians believed a person had multiple souls: the Ka, the Ba, the Ak. The Ka, the life force, needed a dwelling. Food and drink offerings sustained it in the chamber. The Ba, a bird with a human face, could fly from the tomb by day, but return to rest each night with the body. The Ak, the radiant spirit, was born only after proper rites, emerging from the chamber's silence into the eternal sky. Thus, the tomb was not emptiness. It was a threshold, a cosmic cocoon, a place where flesh became something beyond flesh. Inside every hidden chamber, dust tells its own story. Dust from linen wrappings, crumbled over centuries. Dust from reed baskets left by priests. Dust that fell from ceilings painted with stars and never disturbed. This dust carries the memory of prayers spoken low, the faint rhythm of chisels, the last footsteps of workers who sealed the door and walked into daylight for the final time. The chamber has not moved since. It breathes only stillness. It carries only waiting. Every unopened doorway in Egypt is a reminder of time's patience. Doors were more than stone slabs. They were thresholds drawn with paint, decorated with protective figures, sealed with clay stamped by priests. To cross such a door was to cross into the mystery of rebirth. The Egyptians themselves believed the door should never open again. The tomb was meant to remain closed, its treasure untouched, its silence unbroken. Yet for us, those unopened doors still call in whispers. They invite the imagination to drift beyond the seal, to wonder at treasures and prayers that remain unseen. The night deepened over Thebes. The cliffs of the valley stood like dark sentinels, their faces glowing faintly in the moonlight's silver wash. Beneath them, the hidden chambers waited, some known, some still lost, all silent, all resting, The sands shifted gently above, but the doors below did not stir. The priest's seals remained unbroken, the air inside unmoved for centuries. It was not emptiness, but fullness and stillness, a reservoir of faith, a chamber of patience, a sanctuary of silence. And so the last chambers still sleep beneath the desert. Their treasures rest, their spells linger, their doorways wait. No torch has touched them, no voice has broken their silence. The journey of the soul continues in hidden dust, and the last doorway remains unopened, waiting. The journey grows quiet now. We have walked with pharaohs, priests, and hidden stars. Let the desert winds carry your breath, slow, steady, unbroken. If these soft histories cradle your rest, you may return here again, for time is endless, and sleep is its gentlest doorway.